We begin today's shiur 4 lines from the top of Daf Pei-Vov. In our previous shiur, we encountered a machlokes tanoim, a Tanaic controversy regarding Meiser Rishon. According to Rebbe Meir, Meiser Rishon is given strictly to Levium. According to Rebbe Elazar, we saw that he allows the giving of Meiser Rishon. That's a tithe that is practiced every year of the sabbatical years, that is, years 1 through 6 of the 7-year sabbatical cycle. The 7th year, of course, being Shemitah, we do not tithe anything during the sabbatical year. But during the first 6 years of the sabbatical cycle, 1/10 of one's produce is given to a Levi. Rebbe Meir says only to a Levi. Rebbe Elazar introduces the idea that it can be given even to a Kohen. So we are now on the 4th line from the top. My taimo de Rebbe Meir. Why does he prohibit Meiser Rishon to non-Levium? Omar Rav Acha Brei de Rava Mishmei de Gemara. Rav Acha says in the name of a tradition that he has. Rashi points out, Mishmei de Gemara kach kibel meirabo v'rabo meirabo ad Rebbe Meir sheshama mishmo v'lav min daite kumaforish the time of the Rebbe Meir. Rav Acha is not saying the following in his own name, on his own, but rather he's saying it based on a tradition that goes back to Rebbe Meir himself. The pasuk says, "Ki es masa b'nei Yisrael she'arimu l'Hashem truma." So in this pasuk, you see Meiser referred to and truma. Truma is the tithe given to Kohanim. Ma truma asura l'zorim, just like truma is forbidden to non-Kohanim. Af Meiser Rishon asur l'zorim, so too Meiser Rishon is forbidden to non-Levium. Question: Ima truma chayavim alav misa v'choymesh af meiser chayavim alav misa v'choymesh. If you want to parallel the two, then are you going to tell me that just like truma carries with it a penalty of death at the hands of heaven if a non-Kohen eats it? V'chomesh is a payment of one principal plus a fifth for someone who eats truma, who shouldn't have eaten the truma. So too, are you going to say the same thing with Meiser, that there's death at the hands of heaven for someone who deliberately eats it, for a non-Levi that deliberately eats it? And is there a compensation of principal plus a fifth for one who eats it, or just like we say by truma? Obviously, we don't say that. Omar Kro. So regarding truma, the pasuk says, "Umesu bo ki yechalaluhu v'yosav chamishisoi olav." We learn from this. There's a limitation expression through the word bo. Bo means there is death in it, in truma v'lo b'meiser. There's another limitation word in the psukim we just read, olav. The need to add a fifth in its payment is on it for truma v'lo al meiser. So as far as the limitation is concerned of giving the Meiser Rishon only to a Levi and not to a non-Levi, that we learn from the parallel to truma in the pasuk cited above, Bamidbar Perek Yud Ches Pasuk Chav Daled. But as far as carrying the parallel between Meiser and Truma all the way to include Misa and Chomesh, so that, you see, is excluded from the Psukim in Vayikra Chav Beis, Psukim Tes and Yud Daled. We continue. The Rabbanon who disagree with Rebbe Meir, what do they learn from the Pasuk in Bamidbar, Ki es Masa b'nei Yisrael? Ma truma toveles, af meiser rishon nami tovel. Tovel, in this context, it means something that needs to be tithed that hasn't had those tithes removed from it, or very simply untithed produce. So just like truma causes tevel, that is, if you harvested your field and you haven't removed truma, the tithe given to kohanim from your produce, the produce is called tevel, and tevel is forbidden to eat. It's forbidden to everybody to eat. In fact, one who eats tevel, he is punishable by misa bidei shamayim, death at the hands of heaven. So are we to say, just like Truma creates Tevel, Meiser, that is the Rabbanan say, this isn't a question, but the Rabbanan say, that just like Truma creates Tevel, so too a Meiser Rishon that is left within the original produce that hasn't been tithed, that creates Tevel. Rashi adds that even though eating straight Meiser Rishon by a non-Levi does not result in Misa, the produce that hasn't had Meiser Rishon removed from it, in other words, Tevel produce, Tevel, it is Tevel because of the Meiser Rishon that has not been removed, that will result in Misa Bidei Shamayim. So, the Rabbanan learn from Bamidbar Perek Yudches Pasuk Chav Daled this very point. Uchidisanya. We have a Tanaic source that elaborates on this. Rabbi Yosi Oimer, Yochol lo yehei chayav elo al tevel shalohura mimenu kol iker. Could it be that the prohibition of tevel and the punishment that it bears refers only to tevel from which nothing has been removed? Could that be? Huram mimenu truma gedola velo huram mimenu meiser rishon. What about Tevel, from which Truma Gedola, that's the Truma given to Kohanim, the main Truma, in contrast to with Trumas Meiser, which is removed from the Meiser Rishon that a Levi receives. Here we're talking about the basic Truma. What about Tevel, produce from which the basic Truma has been removed, but not Meiser Rishon, or Meiser Rishon velo Meiser Sheni? Or Meiser Rishon has been removed as well, but not the Meiser Sheni tithe. That's the tithe that one separates from his produce in the first, second, fourth, and fifth of the sabbatical years, and eats that in Jerusalem, the 10% of his produce that he brings to Shalim during those years. That's called Meiser Sheni. So what about produce from which Meiser Rishon has been removed, but not Meiser Sheni? Ve'afilu Meiser Oni, or if you're in the third and sixth years of the sabbatical cycle, all the tithes that have been necessary to be removed have been, except for Meiser Oni. Minayin, from where do we know that even Meiser Oni generates Tevel? Untithed Meiser Oni, contained within the rest of your produce, that produce is called Tevel. From where do we know that? Talmud Lomar lo sucha lechol b'shorecha. Ulahalanu Omer, in one pasuk it says that you cannot eat it in your communities. That's a reference to Meiser Sheni. And elsewhere it says Ulahalanu Omer v'ochlu b'shorecha v'saveu. And that pasuk is in the context of Meiser Oni, the tithe given to the poor. Ma shorecha ha'omur lahalon Meiser Oni, just like the shorecha word used there is a reference to Meiser Oni. Af shorecha omur kan, so too the pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Beis also refers to Meiser Oni. The Omar Rachmana lo suchal, and the pasuk read lo suchal lechol b'shorecha, so that the Tanaic source sees a reference to Meiser Oni as well in pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Beis pasuk Yud Zayin. So now, that having been said, we see that Meiser Oni creates Tevel. V'i mehasam, had I had just the pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Beis, have amina lelav, I would have thought that the Tevel that Meiser Oni creates results only in a negative command for one who eats it. Avol misa lo, but it wouldn't carry with it a misa penalty. Komash malon, therefore you need the pasuk from Bamidbar Perek Yud Ches, the pasuk that was originally cited as the basis for Rabbi Meir. The Rabbana need that pasuk to tell me that something that is Tevel even if it's only for Meiser Oni, it carries with it a penalty of Misa Bidei Shamayim, death at the hands of heaven, for one who eats this untithed produce, where it's untithed only because even Meiser Oni has not been removed from it. We look at the Rashi, Dibur HaMaschil, Ma Truma Toveles, Shekol Zman Shelo Hufresha Chayovin Misa Al Achilosu Shel Tevel Deha Misa Ksiv Bei Af Meiser Rishon Tovel Ve'af Agav Debididei Leko Misa Chayovin Misa Al Tevel Shelo Hufresh Meiser Rishon Mimenu. So Rashi is pointing out, as we said earlier, that just like Truma, as long as it has not been tithed, the produce that contains the Truma therein is Tevel and carries with it a Misa Bidei Shamayim penalty, so to all these other tithes that need to be removed, as long as they haven't been removed, the death penalty at the hands of heaven, Misa Bidei Shamayim, is present. Lishna Achrina, another version of that which we've been saying till now, Meiser Rishon de Tovil, that Meiser Rishon creates Tevel. This is what we saw above, that which the Rabbanon had learned from Bamidbar Yudches. So there's another version of that point, and it is Mida Rabbi Yossi Nafka. It is learned from Rabbi Yossi. In other words, instead of citing Bamidbar Yudches Pasuk Chav Daled as the source for Meiser Rishon being Tovel, creating Tevel, so according to this version, Meiser Rishon creates Tevel from that which Rabbi Yossi just taught us in this Tanaic source, and not from Bamidbar Yudches. So the question then is, what do I need? What do the Rabbanon do with the pasuk in Bamidbar Yudches? Gemara answers, Imeahi, had I had just Rabbi Yossi's teaching, Havamina lelav, I would have thought that there is only a negative command. Avol misa lo, but there's no death at the hands of heaven. Komash malon, that's why I need the pasuk in Bamidbar Yudches to tell me that there's also misa bidei shamayim. So that what basically this Lishna Achrino, this second version, would appear to be very similar in what we saw in the first version, just that the wording is presented slightly differently. B'mai ukimta, our Mishnah that prohibits Meiser Rishon to a non-Levi, how have we set it up? Kerebi Meir. We have set it up according to Rebbe Meir. Well, Seifa, Amos Seifa, then state the continuation of the Mishnah. And let's see how things work out now. It said in the Mishnah, Bas Levi mureses l'kohen, ubas kohen l'levi, lo toicha lo b'truma v'lo b'meiser. A Bas Levi who is betrothed by a Kohen, or the daughter of a Kohen who is betrothed by a Levi. In these cases, none of the tithes can be eaten by this woman, not Truma nor Meiser. Well, Hocha, my Zoros Ika, what element of Zoros is there over here? The term Zar is, generally speaking, associated with someone who is a Yisrael. A Yisrael is a non-Kohen or a non-Levi. But here you have Kahuna and Levi on both sides of the equation. The daughter of a Levi being betrothed by a Kohen, and we know that from a Torah perspective, from the Torah level of halacha, once a Kohen betroths a woman, he entitles her to eat from Truma, and vice versa. If a Bas Kohen is betrothed to a Levi, she should be allowed to eat Meiser, and as far as Truma is concerned, that she has coming to her as the result of her being the daughter of a Kohen. So that either way, there should be permission for these women to eat from Truma and Meiser respectively. What element of Zoros is there over here? That we said before that our Mishnah is set up according to Rebbe Meir that says a Zar cannot eat from Meiser Rishon. Where does the element of Zoros come in over here when you're dealing with a bas Levi who's mureses to a Kohen and she cannot eat from Meiser. Omar Rav Sheshes. You'll notice we have triangles highlighting two names. And on the side of the Gemara under the Mivneh heading, these triangles represent Shnei Gishos, two approaches. Lahasbir Hadikotani b'Mishnah Eino Ocheles. The Mishnah says that she cannot eat from Laor Mashikotani b'Seifa Bas Levi Mureses L'Kohen, where we saw the Mishnah says that a Bas Levi that's Mureses Kohen, she's also Lo Tochal. And if up till now we've been thinking Eino Ocheles means literally, because the woman was a non-Levi, so she cannot eat from the Meiser Rishon, even if she happens to be betrothed to a Levi. So we read Omar Rav Sheshes Mai Eino Ocheles Dikotani. What does Eino Ocheles, as it appears in the Mishnah, regarding the whole Mishnah, and its reference to Lo Ocheles B'Maiser, where you see the Mishnah saying Lo Ocheles B'Maiser, what does Eino Ocheles mean? Eino Noisenes Rishus Litrom. It means she doesn't have the authority to instruct an agent to do the tithing. The Rashi that we want to look at together, just a couple lines up from here in the Rashi, Eino Noisenes Rishus L'shlucha l'trom meiser shel oros. She doesn't have the authority to give instructions, to issue instructions to an agent to tithe the meiser rishon tithe of her oros, of the one that betrothed her. Ulaharim mimenu trumas meiser, and to then tithe to have. We're talking once again about a Bas Yisrael that was his arsa that became betrothed by a man who's a Levi. We mentioned very quickly in passing earlier that a Levi who receives truma, a Levi receives Meiser Rishon, is expected to tithe the Meiser Rishon by removing 10% of it and giving it to a Kohen. So this point of the Bas Yisrael that's mureses to a Levi, Eino Ocheles, means that the woman betrothed to the Levi cannot tell an agent to remove from the Orus's Meiser Rishon the necessary Trumas Meiser tithe. And Rashi continues with a very important expression, V'havile ketorem shalom midas. That would be tantamount to having tithes removed from an owner's produce without his knowledge. And that is ineffective. The Gemara continues, Michlal, Dinesua nosenes rishus. So can we infer then from the Mishnah that if she would have consummated her marriage with the Levi, this Bas Yisrael, then she would be authorized to instruct an agent to do the tithing. The Gemara says, that is correct. That if she were Nesua, she were fully married, had consummated her marriage with the husband, she could authorize an agent to do the tithing. V'ha Tanya, as we see in the following source that deals with the Meisris tithe. V'chaltem oisoi b'chol mokoim atem uveischem. That's the pasuk. He limeid al Nesua Bas Yisrael shenisenes rishus litrom. This pasuk teaches us that the wife is compared to her husband with regard to giving authority to an agent to do the tithing. Ata oimer rishus litrom oeno elo lechol. And reading this pasuk, are you saying that it means giving authority to an agent to tithe, or maybe all the pasuk saying that is referring to your own eating, to the woman's own eating of it? So the Gemara answers, Amris, Truma Chamura Ocheles. A woman, a non-Kohen, who is married to a Kohen, she is able to eat Truma, which is a more severe, carries with, let's say, a greater penalty for a authorized person to eat it and does eat it, so truma, which is more chamur, the woman married to the Kohen, is allowed to eat it. Meiser hakal lo kol shekain. Meiser rishon, which is a more relaxed area of halacha, a woman who's married to a Levi, all the more so, she herself would be allowed to eat from it. I don't need the pasuk to tell me that a woman married to a Levi is allowed to eat from Meisris. Ella, so what is the role of this pasuk? Limeid, it teaches me on the Nesua Bas Yisrael, that a woman who is a Bas Yisrael, but she's married to a Levi, Shenoisenes Rishus Litrom, that she gives, she has a right, authority to authorize an agent to do the tithing, to remove the Trumas Meiser tithe from her husband's Meiser Rishon. So up till now, that we've explained or re-explained the term Eina Ocheles as having to do with the right or lack thereof of a woman, of a wife, to instruct an agent to tithe her husband's produce. If the woman has reached only the erusin stage of their marital relationship, so she's not authorized to have an agent tithe her husband's produce. However, if she has consummated her marriage, so then she is allowed to authorize an agent to do so. Mor brei de Ravna Omar. We have a point in the Rashi that says that as far as the Reisha of the Mishnah is concerned, so Mor brei de Ravna agrees with Rav Sheshes that Eina Ocheles, in the case of a Bas Yisrael, that's the Shenis Arsa Lelevi, she does not have the right to authorize an agent to tithe her orus's, the betrothed one's Meiser Rishon. To have an agent remove the Trumas Meiser from the orus's Meiser Rishon. That is a point that Mor brei de Ravna agrees with Rav Sheshes. What Mor brei de Ravna is addressing is the Seifa that we saw quoted just above, the framed section 2 lines above where Rav Sheshes appeared in the triangle. So Mor brei de Ravna Omar Lomar, the Seifa that spoke about a Bas Levi Mureses Lekoyin, or a Bas Koyin to a Levi, and it said there Lo Torah Lo B'Truma V'Lo B'Meiser, it is telling us Lomar She'ein Cholkin Lo Meiser B'Veis Hagronis. A Beis Hagronis is the granary. That's the site at which the tithes were distributed to those who were assigned to receive it, who were destined to receive it. So the Seifa that spoke about Meisris, it said that Lo Tocha Lo B'Truma V'Lo B'Meiser, that's referring to the woman receiving Meiser at the granary without her husband alongside her over there. So let's read that line again. Lomar she'ein cholkin law. Cholkin has to do with distributed to her, so that the tithe is not distributed to her or doled out to her in the granary. Well, we have to explain this a little further. There are 2 explanations why we say that a woman is not to receive the tithe at the granary. According to the approach that doesn't want women going to the granary as is a result of this, the chashash, the worry, the suspicion that she might be there alone. So therefore we say that we don't give the tithe to a woman at the granary. She might appear on her own, or she'll be alone in isolation with another man, the owner of the granary who's distributing the tithes, and we don't want that to happen. Elo, Laman di Omar Mishum Grusha, but according to the opinion that says that we don't want women receiving tithes because of the possibility of divorce. Now, what do we mean when we say a possibility of divorce? Well, that means that a woman may be divorced from her husband, and let us say a woman that's a non-Kohen woman. that's married to a Kohen. So when she's married, she's entitled to receive a truma. But when she's divorced, she's not entitled to receive truma anymore. So what we're worried about is the woman might be divorced. Say a Bas Yisrael might be divorced from her husband, and at that point she becomes a Zora, and people don't know that, and people will end up giving their tithes to her, and she's now a Zora because she's been divorced. So there's an approach that says women shouldn't be in the position where they are receiving the distribution of tithes from the granary. So as not to create an impression in the minds of the public that this is a woman who is acceptable, who is qualified to receive tithes. Now, so that explanation of Grusha, that is a limited explanation in the eyes of the Gemara in its question now. Grusha, we're going to read the parentheses section. Grusha Bas Levi Milo Ochla B'Maiser. The Mishnah had spoken about other cases as well, including the case of a daughter of a Levi who was betrothed to a Kohen or whatever. But when you're dealing with a Bas Levi, we saw the Mishnah saying Eina Ocheles. When we saw the Bas Levi whose mureses to a Kohen doesn't get lo tochal b'truma v'lo b'maiser. If she's a Bas Levi, if she's the daughter of a Levi, even if she's divorced, wouldn't she be able to eat from Meiser? And as a result, what reason is there for her not to receive Meiser in the granary? Uletamech. Well, according to you, that's bothered by the case of the Bas Levi, Grusha Bas Kohen Milo Ochla B'Truma. Doesn't a Grusha, a Bas Kohen, a daughter of a Kohen who happens to be divorced, doesn't she still continue eating truma from her father's house? She certainly does. So then why is it that Ein Cholkin law, why is it that she doesn't receive at the granary site the tithes? Elo Gzeira Mishum Grusha Bas Yisrael. The reason we don't give the Bas Kohen nor the Bas Levi the Truma and Meiser tithes is a rabbinic restriction in anticipation of a Bas Yisrael who is a divorcee. Ihachi, if the reason is because of divorce, my irya mureses. Why does the Mishnah feature the case of the woman who is mureses? Afilu nesua nami, even if she was fully married to her husband, and as a married woman she has all rights in eating it, even if she's nesua, we shouldn't be giving her at the granary site, because in the event that she is divorced, the Bas Yisrael would lose the rights to eating. So why does the Mishnah focus on the case of Me'ureses? The Gemara answers, Aidi detona reisha Me'ureses, since the beginning of the Mishnah that spoke about actual eating, there Me'ureses is limited. So Tana Nami Seifa Mureses. Therefore, in the Seifa, the term Mureses is also used. Even though in the Seifa, the Nesua also would be one who would not receive the tithes that are distributed at the granary site. Let us look at the Rashi. You'll see 3 lines from the bottom. Aidi Detona Reisha Mureses Legabi Achila Mamish. Regarding actual eating, the Hasam Daf Mureses, there we are in fact limiting the Mishnah's teaching to Mureses. The Gabi Bas Kohen L'Yisrael L'Levi Linyan Truma Ubas Levi L'Yisrael Linyan Meiser Ashmina de Posula Erusin. There the Mishnah has an agenda to teach me about a Bas Kohen who is Mureses to Israel, or a Bas Kohen who is Mureses to a Levi, that she does not eat truma. And there, the Mishnah has to tell me about the case of Mereses. The case of Nesua of a Bas Kohen Nesua to a non-Kohen, that's obvious. Likewise, the case of a Bas Levi who is mureses to Yisrael, that she doesn't eat meiser. That has to be taught in Erusin terms, because that's where you have a chiddush. The Gabi Bas Yisrael l'kain u'levi u'Bas Levi l'kain hashminon delo mochli law. And likewise, a Bas Yisrael that is mureses to a kohen, or to a Levi, or a Bas Levi that's mureses to a kohen, the Mishnah has to teach me that the Erusin does not enable her to eat from the tithes. So in the Reisha, the Mishnah wanted to focus on Erusin, because it was telling me chidushim, novel points. Tana nami seifa, therefore in the seifa examples, it used the term mureses as well, even though there it wasn't limited to mureses. The restriction of dividing out the tithes at the granary is in fact not limited to Erusin, but it applies equally to a nisua. And as we explained, in anticipation, all of that is a gezerah, a limitation in anticipation of the situation where the Bas Yisrael, who is married to a Levi or to a Kohen, would be divorced. Tanu Rabbanon, Truma l'Kohen, u'Maiser Rishon l'Levi, Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Truma is given to a Kohen, Maiser Rishon is given to a Levi. That is what Rabbi Akiva says. The opening of this source is quite reminiscent of that which we saw at the top line as well of this Omid. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer l'Kohen. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes to differ with Rabbi Akiva, and he would in effect be telling us that Maiser Rishon is a tithe given to a Kohen. The Gemara asks with a tone of wonderment, L'Kohen v'lo l'Levi, it's given to a Kohen and not to a Levi. The Maiser Rishon, when you open up the Torah, you see that Maiser Rishon is a tithe that's given to Levium. So where does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah come off saying that it's not given to Levium, it's given to Kohanim? The Gemara answers, Eima af l'Kohen. What Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is telling us is that it can be given even to a Kohen. My taima de Rabbi Akiva. Why does Rabbi Akiva say what he does? Rabbi Akiva is telling us that it's given only to Levium. Dichtiv, the pasuk says in the case of Maisris, it says V'el haLeviim tedaber v'omar to'aleim b'Leviim komishto yikra. The pasuk is speaking in the context of Maisris to the Levium, meaning that unto the Levium. Or I should say this pasuk is speaking about the Levium. The Levium are the ones to receive Maiser Rishon. The Idach, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, how does he grapple with the pasuk? If the pasuk is talking about Maisers to Levium, how does he come in saying that Kohanim are part of the pasuk? So the answer to that is Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. In order to understand Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we'll accept Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's understanding of the verses. The Yomer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. In 24 different places in the scriptures, Kohanim are referred to by the term Levi. And here in Yechezkel Perek Mem Daled, you have an example of that, where the pasuk is talking about the descendants of Tzadok. Tzadok was a Kohen, and it says V'Kohanim HaLeviim, the Kohanim that were Leviim. So we see that the term Levi is used as a reference to Kohanim as well. So when the pasuk said on the second line from the top, V'Leviim tedaber v'omar to'aleim, that term is not exclusive of Kohanim. The Rabbi Akiva, what's his response to that? After all, Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that Maiser Rishon is not distributed to Kohanim. So he says, Hacha lo motzes amris. Here in the pasuk of Bamidbar, Perek Yudches, you cannot say that Kohanim are also referred to, Dichtiv, because it says V'achaltem oisoi b'chol mokim. Mishi achol la'ochlo b'chol mokim. The pasuk there in Bamidbar, Perek Yudches, is speaking about a tithe that you can eat wherever you want. So, and that means not just the tithe, but it's referring to the person eating the tithe, that you can eat it wherever you want. Yotza kohen shein yochel ochlo beis hakvaros. A kohen is excluded because a kohen cannot enter a cemetery. So that Bamidbar Yudches is not talking about Kohanim. V'idach, Reb Elazar ben Azariah, he explains the expression b'chol mokom in Bamidbar Yudches v'achaltem oisei b'chol mokom as follows: Kol hecha deboi. But the word b'chol mokom means wherever you want, means the lo boi choma. V'ochil lei betumas haguf lo loki. Let us say that according to Reb Elazar ben Azariah, the focus is not so much on the person as Rabbi Akiva was taking the pasuk, but the focus is on the item. The item, namely Meiser Rishon, is a type of food, a type of tithe that doesn't need a wall. Let's say in contrast to Meiser Sheni, which needs to be brought into the walls of Jerusalem. And likewise, the Meiser Rishon doesn't require purity as Truma and Meiser Sheni require. And hence, the Gemara is saying, Reb Elazar ben Azariah is telling you, if you eat it betumas haguf, if you eat it when the person himself is ritually impure, lo loki is not subject to malchus. So, as far as Reb Elazar ben Azariah is concerned, the focus once again is on the tithe itself, the meiser rishon, not the person per se, and hence v'achaltem oisoi b'chol mokom means you can eat it without a wall restriction and without a purity limitation. Hahi ginsa, there was a garden, Dahav Shokil Reb Elazar ben Azariah meiser rishon mina, from which Reb Elazar ben Azariah, who himself was a Kohen, he was actually a descendant, the 10th generation from Ezra HaSofer, Ezra who was also a Kohen. This Reb Elazar ben Azariah was taking Meiser Rishon from this particular garden, a vegetable garden. Also, Rabbi Akiva came, Ahadre lepischa lebei kavri. He repositioned the entrance to the garden so that the only entrance exit point would be, the only opening to the garden would be through a cemetery. So you see that Rabbi Akiva had something in mind here as far as limiting Reb Elazar ben Azariah from going into that garden and taking maestris. Omar, so Reb Elazar ben Azariah reacted and said, Akiva betarmilo ve'ano chai. The word tarmilo is a word referring to what we would call a backpack. It's a leather case that shepherds used to use for holding their food, and it would hang around their necks. Maybe in that sense slightly different than a backpack, but it was a sack all the same. And Reb Elazar ben Azariah was reacting, as we said, to what Rabbi Akiva did. The Maharsha adds here an explanation that Rabbi Akiva intended to take these maestris on behalf of the poor. The poor are hinted to by this expression tarmilo, and Rabbi Akiva didn't want Reb Elazar ben Azariah taking the tithe, but rather he wanted to take it on behalf of the poor and distribute it to them. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah knew through his tradition that the Kohanim also have a right to receive the Meiser tithe. The full explanation of the Maharsha is more easily understood by seeing the continuation of this Gemara, and hence we'll move on in the Gemara. Itmar mipnei ma konsu leviim b'meiser. Now Rashi points out that this statement is not a direct flow of what was said up till this point, but it's working with a certain assumption that we know that the Levium were fined and that they no longer receive maestris. And it's in this light that the Maharsha made his comment regarding Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva wanted to take the maasros on behalf of the poor and distribute it to them, and this was in the on the backdrop of that which we just said, that the Levium at a certain point in history had lost their exclusive claim on maasros. So here the Gemara is going to analyze that, and you can see here we have we'll see there are a couple of approaches taken in the Gemara, which we've indicated with the numbering on the side. So the question right now is, why is it that the Levium were, we'll say, the victims of, or the object of a fine, depriving them of receiving the Meiser Rishon tithe? Pligi ba Rabbi Yonasan Berger. There are two approaches, or two opinions. Chad Omar Shelo Olu Bimei Ezra. The Levium, as a group, did not return to the land of Israel in the time of Ezra. This was at the conclusion of the 70-year exile to Bavel, where the Persian monarchy gave permission to the Jews in exile to return to Eretz Yisrael and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. The Levium remained behind, and as a result of that, a knas was imposed on them, that they are no longer to receive the Meiser tithe. V'chad Omar, another approach to explain why the Levium were fined. Kedei sheyismechu kohanim olav b'mei tumasan. Well, here we'll just translate. In order for the kohanim to have something to eat when they are in a state of ritual impurity. When a kohen is tamei, so he can't eat truma, his source of food will be maasros. So they'll receive the Meiser Rishon tithe in order to have a food supply when they are tamei. Bishlam alaman damar shelo olu mishum hachi kansu. The first approach makes sense, since they didn't come back to the land of Israel. I might add parenthetically that it's in the land of Israel that tithing is practiced. Well, the Levium showed disinterest in the land of Israel, so they lost out on receiving the tithe. That makes sense. Mishum hachi kansinu, because of that they were fined. But according to that reason, that the kohanim should have a food supply when they are ritually impure. Mishum kohanim kansinu l'Levium. Does that make sense? Because of our interest in the kohanim having a food supply, the Levium have to lose out? Ela kuli alma knasa shelo olu bimei Ezra. Everyone agrees that the Levium's lack of, stopping of receiving the Meiser Rishon tithe is a function of this knas, of this fine. They didn't come back to Israel in the time of Ezra. So then what is the machlokes between Rabbi Yonasan and Savia referring to? The following is the basis of their argument. More sovar knos laniyim, umor sovar kohanim b'mei tumasam aniyim ninu. One says that the knas, the fine, in other words, the loss of Levium, in a sense, is the gain of the poor. And this, by the way, is what the Maharsha was referring to before, when Rabbi Akiva had moved into that to the garden story and changed the entrance, because Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that the knas is the benefit of the aniyim. They are to benefit from it. And Umar Savar, the other opinion that we had seen, we had underlined two Chad Omar several lines up. The other opinion holds Kehanim, when they are in a state of ritual impurity, Kehanim b'mei tumasan aniyim ninu, they are like poor. So that in a sense, there's agreement that the Levium lose, as we said, because of their non-return in the time of Ezra. Who is the benefit of that? The poor. The question is, how do you define the poor? Bishlama, and again we're going to read the parentheses section. Bishlo Amar Knasa La'aniyim. According to the approach that says that the knas is to go to the truly impoverished. That explains Rabbi Akiva's changing of the entrance to that particular garden, keeping Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah out of there. But according to the Amora that says that the Kohanim are also entitled to receive the Meiser Rishon, because when the Kohanim are Tomei, they're viewed as impoverished. Amai ahadre lepischa lebei kavri. What motivated Rabbi Akiva to change the entrance to the garden? Why would Rabbi Akiva have moved the entrance if the knas is to go to Kohanim as well? The Gemara answers, Hachi ka'omar lei. The following is what Rabbi Akiva was really trying to communicate to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. If you are coming to take the Maisris in the context of a fine that, namely, that the Levium should be receiving it, but we restrict them because they didn't come back to the land of Israel, and the rights to the Meiser Rishon was thereby redirected to the poor. And according to this Madomer, of course, the poor include Kohanim when they are Tomei. So if that's why you are going to that garden to collect the Maisris, fine. However, the Ka'asis B'Torah's Chaluka less loch. But if you're going to the garden in order to receive the Meiser Rishon because it's something that is to be distributed at the outset to Kohanim, then you have no basis for taking the Meiser Rishon. So that's what Rabbi Akiva was trying to communicate to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Not that you have no rights to this whatsoever, but it depends. If you're coming to collect it on the basis of Knas, fine. But if you're coming to collect it on the basis of Chalukah, distribution by letter of the law, that no. From where do we know that the Levium did not ascend to Eretz Yisrael in the time of Ezra? Dichtiv, the pasuk says, this is a pasuk that Ezra is in which Ezra is the speaker. Vakapsemel hanahor habo al ahava v'nachno shom yomim shloisha, and I gathered the returnees to this river site, and we camped there for 3 days. V'avino ba'am u'ba'kehanim, and avino from the word lahavin is to understand. As I researched the population in front of me, who were they? And I didn't find any Levium there. So we see that the Levium did not come back with the returnees at the time of Ezra. Since we mentioned Levium, so we make a further reference to them. Originally, Shotrim we translate, generally speaking, as police. Those that are charged with overseeing the population as following the law. So we didn't establish Shotrim other than people who were from Levi. Shnemar v'Shotrim haLeviim lifnechem, as that pasuk would indicate. Levium is associated, Shotrim are associated with Levium. But nowadays, ein mamidim shotrim elo mi Yisrael. The shotrim are chosen from amongst the Yisrael, the larger community. Shneimar v'shotrim harabim b'roshechem. And we look in Rashi, v'shotrim harabim b'roshechem, dahainu Yisrael, sheim rabim mileviim. The word rabim means the masses, so that the pasuk is referring to the multitudes, and the Yisrael constitutes the multitudes, in contrast to Levium, which was a much smaller population. In this Mishnah, we have a couple of diamonds, and on the side of the Gemara, we want to note under the Nosei topic heading, what we're going to see. So the diamonds, which are accompanied by Roman numerals 1 and 2, open up with sections dealing with a Bas Yisrael and later a Bas Kohen. Ma dinom bachilas truma ekev nisuehem l'kohen Levi v'Yisrael. What is the law that applies? What rights or lack thereof does a Bas Yisrael or a Bas Kohen who marries a Kohen and then afterwards a Levi and then afterwards a Yisrael, and they have Veledas Yeladim and then they bear children? What effects do these things have on these different kinds of women? You'll see that a trapezoid form is used to highlight the expression of niseis either niseis to a Kohen, niseis to a Levi, or to a Yisrael. Niseis means married, where she consummates her marriage with one of these different kinds of men, respectively. So the Mishnah begins, Bas Yisrael, sheniseis l'kohen, toichal b'truma. A Bas Yisrael comes from a non-Kohen household. If she marries a Kohen, she consummates her marriage with a Kohen, she's entitled to eat from truma. Meis v'lo himeno ben, tochal b'truma. If the husband dies, but she has a child from him, so she has a son that's a Kohen, that enables her to continue eating truma. Afterwards, niseis l'levi. Then afterwards, she marries she remarries a Levi after she had born a child to the Kohen. So she has a child from a Kohen. She marries a new husband, a Levi. Toichal b'maiser. She eats maiser, and we add not truma, because by marrying the Levi, she loses the kahuna status that she had as a result of her child. She becomes now a zora. So but she is entitled to eat from maiser. Mace, the husband dies, the Levi dies, v'lo himeno ben, and she has a son from the Levi. Tochal b'maiser. She is allowed to eat from maiser, the maiser rishon tithe, because of her son. And that very son also disqualifies her from truma, and that's based on a pasuk that you can see quoted in Rashi. So she eats from maiser, but not from truma. Niseis l'Yisrael, this very same woman now marries a Yisrael. Lo toichal, lo b'truma v'lo b'maiser. She is excluded from truma and maiser. Meis v'lo himenu ben. If the husband Yisrael dies and she has a son from Yisrael, lo toichal, lo b'truma v'lo b'maiser. That Yisrael son prevents her from eating the other tithes that she had eaten in the past, even though she has children from those previous husbands. Meis b'no m'Yisrael, toichal v'maiser. If the son from the Yisrael dies, so then that will say the disqualification that was experienced because of that particular child is removed. So she goes back to the stage before where she was eating maisris. Meis b'no mi Levi. The son that she had from a Levi, now he dies. Tochal b'truma. She's entitled to. How do we describe this lady? This is a lady. She has husbands, and the children that she had from Yisrael and Levi are gone. But she does have a son from the Kohen. So that child enables her to eat from truma. Meis b'no mi Kohen. When the child from the Kohen dies, and again we opened up this section by focusing on a Bas Yisrael. So lo tochal lo b'truma v'lo b'maiser. She has no rights to eat from truma nor from maiser. She's simply a Bas Yisrael, not married, and has no children. Now the second section of the Mishnah, which we see at the top of Daf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, Bas Kohen sheniseis l'Yisrael. As the daughter of a Kohen, so she was entitled to eat truma from her father's house, but now she marries a non-Kohen. She marries Yisrael, so lo tochal b'truma. She stops eating truma from her father's house. Meis v'lo himenu ben lo tochal b'truma. The husband dies, but she does have a son from that Yisrael. She cannot go back to her father's house for truma eating. She's still prevented from truma. Niseis l'Levi tochal b'maiser. Upon her marriage, the Bas Kohen's marriage to a Levi, she's entitled to eat maiser. Meis v'lo himenu ben. if the Levi dies and she has a son from the Levi, tocha b'maiser, that son enables her, the Bas Kohen, to eat from maiser. Nises l'kayin tocha b'truma. She, upon her marriage to a Kohen, that enables her through her husband to eat from truma. Meis v'lo heimenu ben tocha b'truma. If the Kohen husband dies, but she has a son from the Kohen, that Kohen child enables the mother to eat from truma. And now that's enabling her to eat from truma, we'll say overruling the fact that she has children from a Levi and a Yisrael. Meis beno mikohen lo tochal b'truma. If the Kohen child dies, even though we're dealing with a Bas Kohen, but nevertheless you have a Bas Kohen that has children from non-Kohanim, so she cannot eat from truma. Meis beno mi Levi lo tochal b'maiser. If the Levi son dies, the Bas Kohen, cannot eat from maiser either. Meis beno mi Yisrael. If the child that she had from the Yisrael dies, so now we have, what do we describe here? We have a Bas Kohen that has no children. Chazeres lebeis aviyah. She goes back to her husband's house, to her father's house, that is, and eats truma once again. Regarding this, the pasuk says, "V'shova el beis aviyah kinurea milechem aviyah tochel." She goes back to her father's house as she was when she was a youth, and restarts eating truma.